We all know the story of Noah and the ark. We revisit every year. We debate whether Noah was truly righteous or only relatively righteous. Why didn't he argue with God like Abraham? We discuss the merit or heinousness of the kind of God who would cause such destruction. There are many questions to be explored, no doubt. This year, however, this week, I've been sitting just with this one line from the parasha. Vatishachet haaretz lifnei ha'Elohim v'timalei haaretz chamas. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. The rabbis of old dig deeper to explain the specifics of these words and focus first on the first section of the pasuk, Vatishachet haaretz lifnei ha'Elohim. The earth became corrupt before God. What does corruption actually mean, they ask. Rashi of the 11th century describes it as sexual impropriety and idolatry. And Ibn Ezra of the 12th century focuses on the fact that it says lifnei ha'Elohim, before God, and offers two explanations. One being that because it says lifnei Elohim, that they sinned in public. Others say it means people were privately corrupt with regard to secret affairs so that only God was aware of their sins. Ibn Ezra concludes that the people act like a servant who in the presence of their master, meaning God, disobeys God and therefore shows that they don't fear God at all. Haughty. Hizkuni of the 13th century speaks to the moral disintegration of humankind, meaning starting at the top, the highest ranking individuals set an example of depravity. It does not take long for them to be copied by the rest of the people, and therefore the whole community slides into moral disintegration. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch of the 19th century writes that corruption means the overthrow of a good condition and the impeding of progress. Anything that was meant to thrive and prosper moves actually in the opposite direction. The second phrase in the pasuk also receives significant attention based on the principle ein yitor lashon b'Torah. There's no extra language in the Torah, so it must mean something different than the first part. Vatimalei haaretz chamas. What does it mean, chamas? We know that word, by the way, right? Lawlessness, it's translated. It must be different and distinct from corruption. Rashi defines the lawlessness as robbery, as do most of the major commentaries. Though it seems somewhat strange, because robbery doesn't seem to stand at the state of kind of the impact that the idolatry and sexual impropriety do. And so they dive a little more deeply into what does it mean, robbery. We obviously know that robbery is not good, but it doesn't seem to be as dramatic as some of the other explanations. So more nuance is given to it. Ibn Ezra adds that it's not only robbery, but oppression and taking women against their will. Both of which, if you think about it, are a certain kind of robbery. A robbing of people, robbing people of their dignity, robbing women of their dignity. Chizkuni and Orach Chaim of the 18th century understand that the robbery was sophisticated enough to deceive the system by stealing goods indirectly so as not to be prosecuted. Basically, they find a way. It's based on a notion of how big something has to be prosecuted, but they essentially find a way to loophole the law. We know loopholes in our system too, to steal without it being recognized or being prosecuted. And Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch elaborates by saying that the robbery was underhanded dealing by cunning, astute dishonesty, craftily keeping within the letter of the law, and therefore all the human institutions and laws of society go to ruin and human justice cannot be achieved. Vatishacher haaretz lifnei ha'Elohim v'timale haaretz chamas. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. An apt description of our own generation, too. One need not have God's vision to foresee all the ways corruption and lawlessness in public and in private pervade our society, our world. Thursday was the 4th anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, where 11 people were murdered by a white nationalist, an anti-Semite. Anti-Semitism is rampant and normative. An international icon can spew hatred and conspiracy theories that spawn others to hang signs on highways, singing "honk if you know Kanye is right about the Jews." A recent Pew poll found that nearly half of Americans believe that the United States should be a Christian nation. White nationalism is on the rise, and our democracy is deeply fragile. Law deprives women of their freedoms, but ensures that is an essential right to own a gun that kills, and does, because the latest shooting just happened in St. Louis, where 4 people in a high school were just murdered. Right-wing populism is growing across the globe. Israel will be holding its 5th election in 3 years on Tuesday, and it is likely that the neo-Kahanist Otzma Yehudit party of Ben Gvir and Smotrich will be included in the government, and they will be elevated to the role of senior ministers. The war in Ukraine marches on and on and on. I can imagine how painful it was for God to see it all. How outraged God was to witness it all. We even have a window into that pain from God's perspective from the end of last week's parashat, Parashat Bereshit. It says in chapter 6, verses 5 through 8, Adonai saw how great was human wickedness on earth, how every plan devised by the human mind was nothing but evil all the time. And Adonai, God, regretted having made humankind on earth. With the sorrowful heart, God said, I will blot out from earth humankind who I created, humans together with beasts, creeping things and birds of sky, for I regret that I made them. After the flood, God ultimately promises never to make such a deluge again, and it's echoed in this week's Haftarah from Yeshayahu stating, As I swore that the waters of Noach nevermore would flood the earth, so I swear that I will not be angry with you or rebuke you. My loyalty shall never move from you, nor my covenant of friendship to be shaken, says God, who takes us back in love. Perhaps God has made that promise, but it is we that have to live in this world of corruption. Just as God was filled with pain and despair at seeing it all, I think so do we. What do we do with it? How do we live looking at the world the way it is? How do we hold it? And in some way, when you think about thievery, or what's often understood as Hamas, as the greatest lawlessness that is described of the generation of Noach, we have to think, what is robbed of us when we live in a world like this? What are we robbed of? We are certainly robbed of hope. There is so much cynicism also right now, so much disbelief. And for the Jewish people, what does it rob us when all we see is anti-Semitism? What does it do to the soul of a people that that's what they see? Not to mention the actions that follow. What are we robbed of when we live in a world that seems so filled with corruption and lawlessness? We don't hear a word from Noach about how he feels. He is told to build an ark, which in contrast to the endless details of the building of the Mishkan, which go on and on and on. Every bar mitzvah kid who speaks about the Mishkan speaks about how many details there are. The project of the ark is encompassed in 3 verses, but there is one detail that stands out. Sohar ta'aseh lateva, make an opening for light. Just as the rabbis provide for multiple meanings on what corruption and lawlessness means, they do the same for the word sohar, which, if you know Hebrew, is like tzoharaim, like noontime, lunch. Arachat zoharaim is lunchtime, which is a hapax legamanan, a word that only appears once in the Torah, so it receives a decent amount of attention. Hizkuni encompasses the most typical understandings of this word sohar. Sohar ta'aseh lateva. You are to provide means of illumination for the ark. According to most opinions, this is the reference to the window that Noach used later on to dispatch the raven and the turtle dove. During the period that this window was kept closed, he suspended in that area a jewel or a gem which sparkled and provided interior light. While we understand this in our manner, he says, our sages, some of who spoke only of the jewel and the others who spoke only of the window. So there were basically 2 main opinions, that Sohar, the light, comes from the window, or that Sohar, the light, comes from the jewel. Hizkuni is a both and guy, and he says both are correct. He said, except that neither of the people who gave these explanations gave us the full explanation. When the Torah told Noach to provide interior light, it was because most of the days of the deluge, illumination from the sky was totally absent, neither sun nor moon or stars being visible. Noach had to use his ingenuity to provide for interior lighting. So some people say that essentially it was a window. Some people say it was a gem that was planted within the ark. And Hizkuni says yes, and that it was both. There was a window, but because it was so stormy outside, it actually didn't provide light the majority of the time. And so there was this interior jewel. He describes it as hanging. It's often described as embedded in the ark, as kind of a window in of itself, but that's only an interior window that gave light. And then the Torah Aruch, the 14th century commentator, adds another dimension, saying the source of the light was a gemstone, which refracted whatever light was available in all directions, meaning that the light was a multiplier. It wasn't just a gem that provided light, but it actually used whatever light could have been, whether that was from the outside or from the inside, to create more and more light. And it was Noach's responsibility, according to Hizkuni, to have the ingenuity to figure out how to bring as much light in as possible. And Rabbi Yochanan says in Talmud Sanhedrin that the Holy Blessed One said to Noach, "Set precious stones and jewels in the ark, so they will shine for you as the afternoon, as kitzoraim, like the afternoon." Which is not a detail that I had ever thought about studying most of these commentaries before, that they had to actually bring in the stones from outside. It wasn't that they were built into the ark. It was actually Noach who was responsible for building the ark, obviously. So he had to essentially rescue the gems of this world to take them with him to make such a light. Finally, the Baal Shem Tov takes a completely different perspective on the light and the building of the ark. He teaches that one of the meanings of teva, which is ark, also means word. Teva also means word, meaning we should be careful to bring light into the words that come from our lips. Make, aseh lecha tzohar, make the speech and the word coming out of your mouth. You should have this intention and be in complete faithfulness, knowing that each act of speech is its own act of building. God promised never to destroy the earth again in this week's parasha. The question is, will we? The greatest tragedy of all, I think, living in such unsettling times, painful times, hard times, is the complacency and despair that robs us of the belief that we can actually make a difference, that we can change the tide. That is the very purpose of the building of the ark with its light. There is the light that we have to bring with us. One of the things that commentators note about this parasha is the totality of everything. Everything is corrupt. The word kol, all, is used over and over again. It's all encompassing. And when Rabbi Yochanan says that Noah had to bring in the gems from the earth with him into the ark, it means that actually there are remnants that we know that are true and good and bright and holy. The preciousness of knowing that all is not corrupt and lawless. There is also the light that shines within the ark, the insulated place, the gem that teaches us that we need to space to protect us from the outside world. And that's part of what community does, right? That's why we gather together, is to kind of insulate and isolate sometimes to provide the light we need to grant us comfort, family, friends, community. Sometimes that's one mechanism of surviving the lawlessness. I think sometimes the Jewish people obviously does that as well in the midst of so much anti-Semitism, sometimes too much also. There is the light that shines, that protects us, and it's our job really to figure out how we can multiply that light. How can we refract the light that we see? And there is the light that is the window that connects the inside and the outside and requires us to be on the perch, to look outside the protective space and even look at the destruction in the face. It actually is the beautiful idea, this idea that comes from Parashat Noach, why synagogues actually have to have windows, originates in this parasha based on this particular words. Synagogues are not meant to be isolated and closed. They're meant to have windows, to look outside and also to let the light in. The light teaches us that we have to venture outside and face it all. And finally, there is the light that lives in the Word. Worlds are created and destroyed with words. We see that this week with the anti-Semitism, how powerful words are and how destructive they are. We also see when they move and they inspire and that they do good. How might we speak about this world in all its messiness and teach us to speak faithfully and with light, to make also our prayers, that's another understanding of the teva, of the word, is it's the word of prayer, to be bursting with the possibility of light. Please God, grant us all the strength and the fortitude to carry gems, to have the ingenuity to bring on the light and multiply it, to open windows and take the risk to act in this world, and to make little arcs of light with words of truth and hope and love. Shabbat Shalom.